The safest place in the galaxy was not behind a wall, a fleet, or a throne. It was 3 feet behind the quiet human I had insulted 12 hours earlier. I learned this while lying on the polished floor of the Varian Council chamber, staring up through a rain of shattered crystal lights as 12 elite hunters in black armor stood frozen around one man in a gray coat. His name was Caleb Walker. Human. Male. 6 feet tall, maybe a little more. Pale skin. Brown hair cut short. No ceremonial armor. No noble crest. No predator markings. Nothing that should have made the most expensive killers in the inner systems hesitate. And yet they did. One of them had already lost his shock spear. Another was trapped under a conference table he had apparently tried to throw first. 3 more were backing away from Caleb with the slow, careful steps of creatures who had just discovered the floor was not as solid as they believed. I remember thinking, absurdly, that he still looked bored. Not angry. Not frightened. Not even excited. Just mildly inconvenienced, as if the assassination attempt had interrupted a long airport layover. The lead hunter raised his pulse rifle toward my head and said something in Carvaxi, a sharp clicking threat my translator rendered as, "Do not move, Softskin." Caleb moved anyway. He did not sprint. He did not roar. He simply stepped sideways, and suddenly he was between the rifle and me. The weapon fired. Caleb tilted his shoulder half an inch. The blue pulse skimmed past his coat and punched a smoking hole through the marble wall behind him. The whole chamber went silent. Even the alarm seemed embarrassed to continue. Caleb looked down at me and said, "Stay behind me, ma'am." Ma'am. As if we were standing in line at a grocery store. As if 12 armed alien professionals had not just sealed every exit, cut the lights, and turned my diplomatic hearing into a trap. I should have been terrified of them. Instead, for the first time in my life, I was terrified of my own bodyguard. Because the hunters saw it too. That tiny shift in balance. That calm breathing. The way his eyes moved from weapon to weapon, joint to joint, exit to exit, measuring everything in the room like math. The lead hunter laughed, but the sound came out wrong. Too high, too thin. He was trying to convince himself the human was still prey. I had tried to convince myself the same thing when I hired Caleb Walker that morning. The agency had called him affordable. My advisors had called him embarrassing. One of my cousins had called him a walking liability with soft skin and primitive bones. I had believed them. Earth, to us, was a minor world with bad weather and loud music, famous mostly for exporting coffee, lawyers, and impossible insurance claims. No one told me its gravity was heavier than ours. No one told me its animals hunted for sport, its storms swallowed cities, or its people learned as children how to fall, bleed, stand up, and keep going. No one warned me that hiring a human bodyguard was not like hiring protection. It was like inviting a Deathworld to walk beside you in a coat and tie. The lead hunter lunged. Caleb caught the attack with one hand, redirected it with a movement so small my eyes almost missed it, and the hunter struck the floor hard enough to make every glass on the council table jump. Caleb did not look proud. He just adjusted his cuff and glanced at the remaining 11. That was when I understood the terrible mistake everyone in that room had made. They had come to kill me. They had planned for guards, shields, panic, negotiations, maybe a ransom. They had not planned for Caleb Walker. And Caleb Walker had just decided his client was not going to die today. 12 hours before the council chamber fell silent, I was sitting in a security agency lobby that smelled like burned coffee and old plastic, trying not to look desperate while every respectable protector in the Varian capital refused my contract. They did it politely at first, then less politely. One captain claimed his schedule was full. Another said his team was undergoing maintenance. A third looked at my family seal, looked at the bounty notice blinking above my name, and laughed so hard his translator skipped 3 words. I was Lady Soraya Voss, heir to a trade house old enough to have its own moon, and by sunrise I had become too dangerous to stand beside. The receptionist, a 6-armed Navari woman with bored yellow eyes, finally slid one last file across the counter. "Available today," she said. "Low rate. No special equipment required." That should have warned me. Good protectors were expensive. Great protectors came with contracts thicker than a law school textbook. This one had a single page, a grainy identification image, and a name so plain it almost felt unfinished. Caleb Walker. Human. Earth origin. Private escort license. Prior colonial security work. No noble sponsorship. No visible enhancements. No intimidation index listed. I stared at the image. Pale skin. Short brown hair. Calm brown eyes. Gray coat. Average human frame. Not fragile, exactly, but compared with the armored professionals who had just rejected me, he looked like someone who would apologize after bumping into a door. I asked if there had been a mistake. The receptionist did not even blink. He is the only one still willing to accept. That was how I bought the cheapest human in the building. Caleb arrived 11 minutes later carrying a canvas bag in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other. Not a weapon case. Not a shield pack. Coffee. He stopped in front of me, gave a small nod, and said, "Lady Voss, I am Caleb Walker. I understand someone may try to harm you today." Someone may try, I repeated, because the understatement was so absurd I almost smiled. "Mr. Walker, 3 houses have placed hunters on my trail, my last convoy was disabled, and every serious guard in this city just abandoned me." He sipped his coffee once, not quickly, not nervously. "Then we should leave by the side exit." I had not told him there was a side exit. Before I could ask, my former chief escort, Captain Threx, stepped into Caleb's path. Threx was 8 feet tall, plated in bronze armor, and proud of both facts. He looked down at the human and made a low sound of amusement. This is what she chose. A soft-world mammal with a drink? Caleb moved his coffee slightly away from Threx, as if the cup deserved more protection than his own face. "Please step aside," he said. Threx shoved one armored hand against Caleb's shoulder. It was not a full strike. It was a public insult, the kind warriors use when they want a crowd to laugh. The crowd did laugh. For about 1 second. Caleb did not move backward. Threx did. Somehow the captain's wrist turned, his balance vanished, and his huge body sank to one knee with a sound like a dropped toolbox. Caleb still held the coffee. None had spilled. Threx froze, not from pain, but from confusion. Caleb leaned closer and spoke softly enough that only I heard it. "You are blocking my client's exit." Threx pulled his hand back as if the human had become hot metal. The lobby went quiet in that wonderful, terrible way crowds go quiet when their favorite joke stops being funny. Caleb looked at me, calm as a man asking whether I needed help with luggage at an American airport. "Are you ready, Lady Voss?" I should have asked what he had done to Threx. I should have asked why the receptionist suddenly looked relieved that he was leaving her building. Instead, I lifted my chin, gathered what remained of my dignity, and followed the cheapest human bodyguard in the capital toward the side exit. Behind us, no one laughed again. The side exit should have been safer. That was the theory, anyway. It opened into a private service corridor beneath the agency tower, where polished public floors became gray utility panels and the ceiling dropped low enough that taller species had to duck. Caleb noticed that before anyone else. He glanced up once, then adjusted our path by 3 feet, keeping me away from the exposed maintenance vents. I thought he was being dramatic. Then a loose bolt fell from one vent and struck the floor exactly where my head would have been. Caleb looked at the bolt, then at the vent, then at me. "Maintenance here is careless," he said. Not an accusation, not alarm, just a note. As if falling metal was a customer service issue. Waiting near the underground transport bay were the remains of my escort team, for armored professionals who had decided my contract was still worth something as long as they were not the first targets. Their leader, a silver-scaled veteran named Auric, looked Caleb up and down with open disappointment. "This is the replacement?" Caleb sat, his canvas bag on the floor, and finished the last inch of coffee. "Temporary supplement," Caleb said. Auric did not like that. Neither did the others. Their pride had already been bruised by fear, and fear always looks for something smaller to step on. Auric pointed toward the agency training annex across the corridor. "Reflex check. If the human rides with us, we know what he can do." I almost refused. We were late. I was being hunted. The capital traffic grid was already sealing routes around us. Caleb simply tossed his empty cup into a recycler from 12 feet away without looking. It dropped cleanly through the slot. "Sure," he said. Auric smiled like he had just won. The annex chamber was built for professional combat species. All reinforced flooring, impact walls, and floating target ports. The system scanned Caleb and hesitated. That was the first thing that bothered me. Machines do not hesitate unless something in their instructions disagrees with reality. Auric selected heavy warrior calibration, a level meant for beings with 4 arms, layered armor, and reflex glands. Caleb stood in the center circle with his hands at his sides. No helmet, no shield, no warm-up. The first training round fired from his left. He leaned half an inch, and it passed his shoulder. The second came from behind. He stepped forward before the port opened, as if he had heard the decision before the machine made it. The third, fourth, and fifth came together. Caleb turned sideways, let two pass, caught the last one against his palm guard, and looked at it like it had arrived in the wrong mailbox. Oryx stopped smiling. The chamber increased speed automatically. 10 rounds. 15. 20. The ports flashed so quickly my eyes turned them into streaks of blue light. Caleb did not dance. He did not perform. He moved like a man walking through light rain, annoyed but not threatened. One round clipped the edge of his coat. He looked down at the mark, sighed, and shifted his weight. After that, the machine never touched him again. Then it made a sound I had never heard from military equipment. A warning chime. Calibration mismatch, the system announced. Subject response exceeds test. Ceiling. Oryx stepped forward, angry now, and switched the chamber to manual. That was against every safety protocol printed on the wall. Caleb noticed the same sign and raised one eyebrow. Captain, he said, that seems unnecessary. Oryx fired the entire array at once. 40 training rounds crossed the chamber in a bright net meant to overwhelm armor, shields, and nervous systems. I flinched. Everyone flinched. Caleb reached into the air and caught one. Just one. The rest passed around him, missing by inches, not because the machine failed, but because he had found the only place in the room where nothing could hit him. He opened his hand. The captured round blinked harmlessly against his glove. Was that calibration? He asked. No one answered. Behind me, one of my escorts whispered a word my translator rendered as impossible. Caleb placed the training round gently on the floor, picked up his canvas bag, and turned toward the transport bay. We should move, Lady Voss. They will expect the main road to be watched. I followed him without argument this time. So did Oryx, but he walked farther back than before. The transport waiting for us looked expensive enough to make poor decisions feel elegant. It was a black diplomatic skimmer, 20 feet long, all curved glass and silver trim, with a cabin designed for privacy and a driver compartment sealed behind polarized shielding. Oryx insisted on taking the front escort seat. His pride had recovered just enough to make him difficult again. Caleb did not argue. He walked around the vehicle once, touched the rear door, checked the underside without kneeling, then looked at the rooftops surrounding the service exit. There were 7 towers within a clean firing angle. I knew that because my security tutors had taught me threat geometry when I was 12. Caleb knew it because his eyes had already stopped on each one for less than a second. Too many windows, he said. This is the capital, Oryx snapped. There are always windows. Caleb opened the rear door for me. That is why I dislike cities. I slid inside, trying to decide whether that was a joke. With humans, I was beginning to suspect the most alarming sentences were the ones delivered casually. Caleb took the seat across from me instead of beside me. He angled his body toward the window, one hand resting near his canvas bag, the other on the seat belt latch. The skimmer lifted into traffic, rising between lanes of glowing vehicles and advertisement screens tall enough to cover entire buildings. For 3 minutes, nothing happened. That was the worst part. I watched Caleb watch everything. Reflections in the glass. The movement of maintenance drones. The rhythm of traffic lights. He did not stare at danger. He seemed to listen for it. Oryx muttered through the intercom that the route was clean. Caleb looked at the left window. No, he said. One word. Flat. Final. Then he reached across the cabin, unlatched my belt, and pulled me down onto the floor. I was too shocked to protest. A bright line flashed through the space where my head had been and punched through the opposite window with a sharp pop of collapsing glass. The cabin pressure alarm screamed. Oryx cursed. The driver swerved. I hit the carpet hard, more offended than injured, and Caleb was already moving. He shoved his coat over me to block the glittering fragments, braced one hand against the ceiling, and kicked the damaged door open against the wind. We were 600 feet above the avenue. I remember that number because the navigation display kept blinking it while my life became unreasonable. A compact hunter drone swept out from behind a billboard, its targeting eye glowing blue. Caleb looked at it with the expression of a man seeing a mosquito at a barbecue. Stay low, he said. Then he stepped out of the moving skimmer. Not fell. Stepped. His left hand caught the door frame. His boots hit the outer rail, and the wind hammered his coat backward as the drone came around for a second shot. Auric yelled that no unarmored species could survive outside a vehicle at that speed. Caleb apparently did not receive the memo. The drone fired. Caleb shifted his shoulder, grabbed a loose emergency cable from the skimmer, and snapped it outward like a lasso. The cable caught the drone's stabilizer. Its perfect flight became a drunken spiral. Caleb pulled once. The drone slammed against the roof with a metallic crunch that made the whole cabin shake. He climbed up after it, balanced on the skimmer as traffic blurred below us, opened a maintenance panel on the drone, and removed something small and glowing. The machine went dead instantly. No explosion, no drama, just silence. Caleb dropped back into the cabin, set the glowing part on the seat, and closed the broken door as much as the frame allowed. His hair was windblown. His sleeve was torn. His breathing had not changed. Auric stared at him through the partition with his mouth slightly open. I stared at the hole in the window, then at the spot where my head had been 1 second earlier. Caleb picked up his coat, shook glass from it, and handed it back to me with embarrassing politeness. You may want to keep your seatbelt off for a while, Lady Voss. I looked at the dead drone on the roof, then at the human sitting across from me as if nothing important had happened. For the first time that day, I did not wonder whether Caleb Walker was qualified to protect me. I wondered what kind of world made stepping out of a flying car seem normal. By the time the skimmer reached the lower approach to the Varian Council Tower, Auric had stopped giving orders and started pretending he had always intended to let Caleb lead. It was not convincing, but it was quieter, and at that point I respected quiet. The tower rose ahead of us like a blade of white stone, 3,000 feet of diplomatic arrogance polished until it reflected the morning sun. Every important family in the capital had rooms inside. Every hallway had cameras. Every entrance had scanners. Every guard had a uniform designed to remind visitors that power was expensive. Caleb looked at all of it and frowned. Not fear. Not awe. Irritation. Too many blind corners, he said. Auric made a weak sound from the front seat, then wisely let it die. We landed on a private platform halfway up the tower, far from the public gates. My legs still felt unsteady when I stepped out, though I would have blamed the wind before admitting that to anyone. Caleb walked beside me with his canvas bag over one shoulder, the broken drone component, wrapped in a cloth and tucked away as evidence. I finally asked the question that had been burning through my dignity since the transport attack. Mr. Walker, who exactly have you protected before? He glanced down the landing corridor. Colonists, survey crews, a few trade officials, children during an evacuation. Once a dog. I stopped walking. A dog? Caleb nodded. Golden retriever. Very friendly. Terrible situational awareness. I stared at him, waiting for the rest of the explanation. There was none. That was the strange thing about Caleb. He spoke as if the details that might terrify other people were not worth mentioning, and the details involving earth animals were apparently important. Soraya, Auric said quietly, perhaps now was not the time. But I could not help it. You saved a dog? Caleb looked at me, completely serious. She was part of the family. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the universe had become ridiculous. My life was being hunted by 3 noble houses. My expensive protectors had failed one by one. And the calmest person in the city was a human who listed a family pet beside colonists and children. Then the tower security system recognized Caleb at the checkpoint, and the laughter died in my throat. The scanner washed blue light over him. His file opened for half a second on the guard station display before the system locked it behind a red warning seal. I saw only fragments. Walker, Caleb. Earth evacuation corridor. Black Ridge Colony. Civilian extraction under hostile pressure. Threat classification restricted. The guard saw more than I did. His posture changed so fast it was almost rude. One moment he was bored. The next he was standing very straight, both hands visible, voice suddenly respectful. Mr. Walker, he said, your credentials are accepted. Caleb nodded once. Thank you. I wanted to ask what Black Ridge was. I wanted to ask why a tower guard on Varian knew the name of a human bodyguard, but I did not. I wanted to ask why Auric had gone pale beneath his silver scales. I did not get the chance. Halfway through the private corridor, a maintenance worker stepped from an open panel carrying a tool case. Caleb's hand touched my elbow and moved me behind him before my brain understood the warning. The worker's posture was wrong. Too balanced. Too calm. His tool case opened without touching the floor, and a compact stun launcher slid into his hand. He aimed at me. Caleb's canvas bag moved first. That was the best way I can describe it. 1 second it hung from his shoulder. The next it snapped through the air with a dull crack, knocked the launcher sideways, and wrapped around the attacker's wrist strap. Caleb pulled. The weapon skidded across the floor and stopped at Oryx's boots. The fake worker stumbled forward, and Caleb simply placed one hand against his chest and guided him into the wall with enough force to end the argument without making a scene. The attacker slid down, stunned and very awake to his own bad decision. Caleb looked at the open maintenance panel, then at Oryx. Please secure him. Oryx obeyed. Immediately, I looked at the canvas bag. It had a coffee stain, one torn seam, and apparently a better combat record than half my escort team. Caleb picked it up, checked the strap, and seemed relieved it had not ripped. What is in that bag? I asked. He opened it just enough for me to see a folded jacket, a first aid kit, a pack of mint gum, and nothing else. Emergency supplies, he said. I looked at the defeated attacker, then at the bag, then at Caleb. On Earth? I asked slowly, is everything a weapon? Caleb thought about that for a moment as the corridor alarms finally began to wake up. No, ma'am, he said. But most things can be useful if somebody makes poor choices nearby. The council tower tried to pretend nothing was wrong. That was its first mistake. Alarms whispered behind the walls, soft and expensive, the kind designed not to frighten donors. Security lights shifted from white to amber. Doors sealed in quiet sequence down the corridor behind us, one after another, like the building was swallowing its own spine. Oryx dragged the fake maintenance worker toward a wall restraint and called for backup. No one answered. Caleb noticed before the rest of us did. He looked at the ceiling speakers, then at the floor panels, then at the polished black door at the end of the hall. Lady Voss, he said, do you trust the council chamber staff? I almost said yes. Then I remembered how many people had known my route, my arrival time, and my private landing platform. No, I said. Good. His answer did not comfort me. We reached the black door, and it opened by itself. Beyond it was the East Negotiation Chamber, a room built for treaties that could survive small wars. Reinforced glass, titanium ribs, independent air supply, gravity control, diplomatic privacy field. I had signed contracts in that room since I was old enough to understand that rich people call threats negotiations when the chairs are comfortable. Today, the room felt wrong. Too empty, too polished, too ready. Caleb stopped at the threshold. Oryx, still behind us, said, the chamber is secure. Caleb looked at him. Secure against whom? That was when the door behind us sealed. The sound was not loud. It did not need to be. Every screen in the room flashed red, and a calm, artificial voice announced, Emergency Diplomatic Containment Active. Please remain still until authorized personnel arrive. Oryx swore. I stepped back, but the door had already become part of the wall. Caleb placed one hand against the seam and tested it. Not hard, just enough to learn what it was. The walls hummed. Vents opened near the floor. A pale silver mist began sliding into the room. Non-lethal restraint gas, Oryx said quickly, though his voice had climbed half an octave. It will slow motor function. Caleb looked at the mist, then at me. How long until it affects you? I do not know, I admitted. Different biology. Caleb removed a folded cloth from his canvas bag, dampened it with water from a table pitcher, and pressed it into my hands. Breathe through this and stay low. Then he moved to the main door again. Oryx grabbed his arm. That door is rated against vehicle impact. Caleb looked at Oryx's hand until Oryx removed it. The gravity changed. My knees bent before I decided to bend them. The room became heavy. My jewelry pulled against my neck. Oryx dropped to one knee, armor whining under stress. The artificial voice continued politely, gravity stabilization in progress. Caleb exhaled. Once. Not panic. Not pain. More like annoyance after a long line at airport security. The mist thickened. The door locks glowed blue. Whoever had built the trap had expected a team. Shields. Cutters. Codes. Maybe an hour of negotiation while the gas did its work. Caleb gave them less than 10 seconds. He wedged his fingers into the tiny seam where the door met the frame. Oryx stared at him. That is solid titanium composite. Caleb planted one boot against the floor. On Earth, he said, people put too much faith in labels. His shoulders tightened under the gray coat. The seam made a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake. The door did not open, exactly. It protested. Then it shifted half an inch. Every security sensor in the room screamed at once. The gravity climbed again. I could barely lift my head. Caleb kept pulling. The muscles in his forearms stood out. His face stayed calm. Another inch. Then another. Enough space for air to move. Enough space for hope to become embarrassing. He turned his head toward me. Lady Voss, when I say move, you move. The ceiling panels opened, revealing two concealed restraint drones unfolding like metal insects. Caleb saw their reflection in the polished table. He let go of the door with one hand, picked up a heavy council chair, and tossed it upward without looking. The chair struck the first drone and sent it spinning into the second. Both crashed harmlessly onto the table, scattering crystal glasses across the floor. Move, Caleb said. I crawled toward the opening, cloth pressed to my face. Dignity abandoned somewhere behind me. Auric followed, dragging his pride with him. Caleb held the door with one hand while the room tried to close it on him. For one awful second I thought he would be trapped inside. Then he stepped through sideways, released the door, and let it slam shut behind us with a thunderous finality. In the corridor, emergency lights painted his face red. He adjusted his torn sleeve, picked up his canvas bag, and looked mildly disappointed. That was a trap for soldiers, I whispered. Caleb glanced back at the sealed chamber. No, ma'am. That was a trap for people who wait to be rescued. The corridor outside the sealed chamber should have led to the main hearing floor, but the tower had changed while we were inside. Security shutters had dropped over the windows. Service doors stood open where they should have been locked. The air smelled faintly of hot circuitry and that sharp, clean scent buildings use when they are trying to hide fear. Auric checked his communicator again. Still no response. Backup was either blocked, bought, or already somewhere else pretending to be useful. Caleb moved ahead of us now. Not far. Never more than 6 feet. Close enough to reach me. Far enough to see trouble before it reached us. I hated how quickly that distance had become comforting. We passed a wall of old council portraits, 100 solemn faces of statesmen who had survived wars by sending other people to them. At the end of the hall, the floor opened into a circular reception room beneath the main chamber. The lights were dim. The fountain in the center had stopped running. Around it stood 8 figures in dark formal armor, motionless as statues. Their leader stepped forward. Lord Malrek Vane. I recognized him before my translator whispered his name. Everyone in the capital did. He was not the most powerful noble hunting me, but he was the one who enjoyed being seen doing it. Tall, silver-horned, dressed in black ceremonial plating, he smiled like a man arriving early to his own victory party. Lady Soraya, he said, you have been very difficult to meet today. Caleb stopped. Auric raised his sidearm. The 8 armored guards raised theirs faster. Malrek lifted one hand, and everyone froze except Caleb, who simply looked tired of the choreography. This does not need to become embarrassing, Malrek continued. Your testimony ends today. Your trade house signs over the border routes. You retire somewhere quiet. Very generous terms, considering the inconvenience. I looked at the disabled cameras, the sealed hallway, the armed guards. You tried to gas me in a council chamber. Malrek sighed. Politics is full of unpleasant ventilation. Caleb turned his head slightly toward me. Do you want to negotiate with him? The question was so calm that Malrek laughed. I did not. No, I said. Caleb nodded. Then we keep walking. That was when Malrek made his mistake. He did not attack Caleb. He walked around him. Fast, confident, trusting his guards and his title and the old belief that important people can touch whatever they want. His hand closed around my upper arm and pulled me toward him, not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to humiliate. Enough to remind everyone in the room that he thought I was property being reclaimed. Auric shouted. The guards shifted. Malrek leaned close and said, call off your pet human. Caleb stopped breathing. I know that sounds impossible. People breathe. Living things breathe. But for 1 second, the human became so still that the whole room seemed to lean away from him. His eyes moved to Malrek's hand on my arm. Not to the weapons. Not to the guards. Just the hand. Release my client, Caleb said. Malrek smiled wider. Or what? Caleb moved. The security recording later showed only a blur between frames, which became famous because experts spent weeks arguing whether the camera had malfunctioned. It had not. One moment Malrek held my arm. The next, his hand was empty. I was behind Caleb, and Malrek was seated on the floor with the stunned expression of a man whose body had received instructions faster than his pride could process them. No blood, no spectacle, just instant correction. One guard fired a stun bolt. Caleb caught Malrek by the collar and shifted him out of the line of fire without looking, which was more mercy than Malrek deserved and more control than any alien in that room expected. The bolt struck the fountain and filled the room with blue sparks. Caleb stepped forward. The guards rushed him in pairs, professional, trained, expensive. It did not matter. He did not trade blows. He solved problems. A wrist turned. A knee folded. A weapon left one hand and landed neatly in another corner. An armored giant swung a shock baton, and Caleb ducked under it, tapped the guard's balance point, and let the giant trip over his own momentum into a couch that cost more than my first estate. Oryx stood beside me with his sidearm raised and no target left long enough to aim at. In less than 10 seconds, the reception room belonged to Caleb. The guards were down, conscious, confused, and very still. Malrek tried to crawl backward, dragging dignity behind him like a torn cape. Caleb picked up the fallen shock baton, switched it off, and placed it on the fountain edge. Then he looked at Malrek. "You touched my client," he said. Malrek swallowed. Caleb's voice stayed quiet. "Do not do that, AG." Malrek did not answer Caleb. He reached for the ring on his left hand instead. It looked decorative, a black band set with a small red stone, the kind nobles wore to prove they could afford useless beauty. Caleb saw the motion and stepped forward, but Malrek pressed the stone first. The entire reception room dropped. That is the only word that fits. Not physically. The floor stayed where it was. The walls stayed polished and white. The dead fountain still held its perfect circle of water. But every living thing inside the room suddenly remembered weight. Oryx went down on both knees, armor joints whining. The guards who had been trying to stand flattened against the carpet with startled grunts. I caught the edge of the fountain and nearly lost my grip as my own bones seemed to double, then triple, then become something the universe had personally decided to tax. Malrek laughed from the floor, breathless but triumphant. "Gravity suppression field," he said. "Old council emergency system. Tuned for riot control. 6 times variant standard." His eyes lifted toward Caleb. "Let us see your pet walk now." Caleb stood in the center of the room, one hand still near his canvas bag, shoulders slightly lowered beneath his gray coat. He was not comfortable. I could see that. A vein had risen along his neck. His boots had sunk deeper into the carpet. But he was standing, not shaking, not crawling, standing. Malrek stopped laughing. The emergency field hummed louder, as if offended by the human's posture. 6 times variant standard should have pinned every unassisted species in the room. It had pinned everyone else. Even the fountain water pressed low and still, its surface curved like glass under invisible pressure. Caleb rolled his shoulders once. Slow, controlled, annoyed. Then he looked at Malrek and said, "That is closer." No one spoke. I did not understand the sentence at first. Closer to what? Then Oryx, still fighting to lift his head, whispered through clenched teeth, "Earth gravity." My translator made the words sound simple. They were not simple. They were a door opening in my mind onto a planet I had never respected. A place where children learned to run under a sky that pressed harder than ours. Where bodies grew dense because the world never stopped pulling. Where every step was training, every fall was a lesson, and every living thing had to bargain with weight before breakfast. Malrek pressed his ring again. The field climbed. Lights flickered. A chair cracked under its own decorative frame. My vision narrowed at the edges. Caleb bent one knee. For one terrible second, hope returned to Malrek's face. Then Caleb took a step. The sound of his boot against the floor was not loud, but it ended something in that room. Pride, maybe. Assumption. The old galactic certainty that humans were soft because they had soft skin. Caleb walked through the gravity field like a man crossing a yard during bad weather. Slow, yes. Careful, yes. Stoppable, no? One guard tried to raise a compact launcher. Caleb nudged it aside with his foot without breaking stride, and the weapon slid across the carpet far out of reach. Another guard reached for an alarm panel. Caleb picked up a fallen cushion and tossed it gently enough to seem insulting. It struck the panel cover and shut it before the guard could touch it. No rage. No wasted motion. Just correction after correction, as if the room had become a messy table and Caleb was putting everything back where it belonged. Malrek dragged himself backward until his shoulders met the fountain. For the first time since I had known him, he looked small. Caleb stopped 2 feet away. The gravity field still pressed down. The lights still trembled. Around us, Varian nobles, hired guards, and one very embarrassed captain watched a human remain upright inside the trap meant to humble armies. Malrek lifted his ring hand again. Caleb placed one boot lightly on the sleeve of Malrek's armor, pinning the arm to the carpet without crushing it, without drama, without even looking impressed. "I would turn that off," Caleb said. Malrek obeyed. The room rose around us as the field died. Air rushed back into my lungs. Oryx sagged with relief. The guards did not move. Caleb stepped away from Malrek and adjusted his cuff like the matter had been settled by paperwork. I stared at him, heart racing, pride gone, fear changing shape into something dangerously close to faith. Earth was not a planet. Earth was a training program with oceans. The gravity field died, but the silence stayed heavy. For several seconds, no one in the reception room moved except Caleb Walker, who bent down, picked up his canvas bag, and checked the torn seam as if that was the real damage worth noting. Malrek sat against the fountain, staring at the human with the ruined expression of a man whose entire education had failed him in public. Oryx finally managed to stand. His armor creaked. His pride did not. "Lady Voss," he said, voice low, "we need to reach the main chamber. Your testimony still matters." I looked at Malrek, at his guards, at the disabled cameras, at Caleb calmly offering me one hand up. My testimony had mattered when I thought laws protected people. Now I understood laws were only paper until someone dangerous enough stood beside them. Caleb helped me to my feet and immediately stepped half a pace behind my right shoulder. Not in front this time. Behind. Close. Ready. The strange part was that I felt safer with him there than I had ever felt behind a wall of professional soldiers. We took the stairs because Caleb did not trust the elevators, and after what I had seen, I would not have trusted a chair unless he inspected it first. 3 floors up, council security finally broke through the interference. Doors opened. Officers rushed in with shields raised and questions ready. Every question died when they saw Malrek being escorted behind us by his own surviving guards. Hands visible, face pale, saying nothing at all. The main chamber was full when we entered. Noble houses, trade judges, military observers, news drones, all waiting to see whether I had disappeared or surrendered. Instead, I walked in with dust on my sleeves, a torn, formal sash, and one quiet human bodyguard carrying a canvas bag like he had come from the gym. Whispers moved through the chamber. Some amused, some confused. Then the emergency evidence file uploaded from Caleb's captured drone component onto the central display. Routes, bribes, hunter payments, Malrek's authorization codes. The entire conspiracy unfolded in blue light above the council floor. The room did what powerful rooms always do when truth arrives without asking permission. It panicked politely. While they argued, I looked at Caleb. "Who are you really?" I asked. He blinked once, as if the question surprised him. "Caleb Walker, ma'am. Licensed private escort." "That is not what I mean." I pointed at the display, where his restricted file had opened for council review. The Black Ridge evacuation. The colony breach. The redacted survival report. The Earth origin tag now flashing under a classification I had never seen before. Extreme Deathworld adaptation. Caleb followed my gaze and sighed. Bureaucrats like dramatic labels. Oryx gave a short, broken laugh that sounded almost hysterical. Dramatic labels? Human. That file says your home world produces civilian stress responses above our special forces baseline. Caleb shrugged. People back home call that a rough week. Before anyone could answer, one of Malrek's last agents made his final poor choice. He had been disguised as a recording clerk near the lower benches, close enough to the speaker rail, far enough from the guards. He pulled a compact pulse dart from beneath his sleeve and aimed it at me. I saw the weapon. Oryx saw the weapon. The council saw the weapon. Caleb was already there. He did not tackle the agent. He did not make a speech. He stepped between us, caught the man's wrist, turned the weapon safely toward the ceiling, and pressed one finger against the release latch. The dart fired upward and burst harmlessly against the chamber shield in a blue flash. Caleb removed the weapon, placed it on the floor, and guided the agent gently but firmly into a security hold until the officers took over. No blood, no spectacle, just an ending. The chamber stared, not at the agent, at Caleb, at the soft-skinned human who had treated assassination like a scheduling problem and gravity traps like inconvenient weather. One judge whispered, "What are humans?" Caleb looked uncomfortable with every eye on him. I answered before he could. Humans are what happens when a planet spends 1,000,000 years trying to kill something and fails. No one laughed. Not this time. Later, the official report would say Lady Soraya Voss survived due to the intervention of licensed protector Caleb Walker. That was the clean version. The version with no fear in it. The truth was simpler and much harder for the galaxy to accept. I had not hired the best bodyguard in the capital. I had hired a man from Earth. And Earth, we finally understood, did not raise prey.